Hi, I'm Terrance D'Ambrosio. I'm the Director of Imaging Services at the Northeast Document Conservation Center. We are a nonprofit conservation, digital reformatting and preservation services center based in the Northeast in Andover, Massachusetts. So today I'm going to cover a few different options that you might be interested in pursuing in order to digitize paper-based and photographic special archival collections that you might have in your institutions. And we're covering three different types of setups at varying degrees of complexity with varying degrees of investment to cover the different sort of ranges of resources that you might have available for you, at the different staffing resources you might have available, and the different budgets that you might have available. So the first option is using some sort of tablet. We have set up Apple's iPad. You could also use an Android tablet or some other manufacturer or operating system. So this option involves a pretty low-cost table or surface, a mounting arm and column, and then a support for the iPad itself. This is a really nice, very, very low-cost option that sort of makes the assumption that you have the tablet already available, that you're using it for some other purpose. One thing that I would like to sort of underscore is that this is not really appropriate for preservation quality digitization. This is really about getting access-oriented digital images that are, have legible content that would be appropriate for sharing with members of your community, not really intended as one-to-one digital surrogates of an original object. And in a minute, we'll be taking a look at some other options that would be appropriate for doing that kind of digitization. With this workstation, the platform, the column and arm, and then the surface that holds the iPad, that can all be bought together. It's one unit. There might be other options out there available. The one that we have here is manufactured by Belkin. It's somewhere in the $100 to $200 range. So again, really low-cost, entry-level option for digitizing collections. User interface is going to be very, very simple as using an iPad. So the idea here is that virtually anybody could be digitizing pretty much any small format, two-dimensional object that can fit on the table that is sort of included in the kit. One of the reasons that this workstation is not appropriate for preservation and quality digitization is that the iPad itself, it produces JPEGs. JPEG files are compressed. It's not a preservation format. You could potentially, save those JPEGs as TIFFs for preservation, just to hold on to these files in the long term. But again, just sort of fundamentally, it's a workstation that's not appropriate for preservation, and really just about capturing content that you might have in your collection materials, and then making that content available electronically with your community. So the next workstation that we're going to take a look at is one that I'm sure everybody is familiar with, at least everybody in this particular audience is familiar with, and that is a flatbed scanner. So the idea in this sort of more general presentation, if you want to call it that, is that the degree of sophistication, the degree of complexity is increasing. So the iPad station that we just talked about is as simple and straightforward as it can be, and the flatbed scanner workstation is sort of upping that degree of complexity, but also the degree of flexibility and the amount of content that you can digitize, and the quality at which you can do that digitization. One thing that's really great about flatbed scanners that make them very powerful, but also relatively meaning by a wide margin, relatively easy to use, is that the majority of the interaction with the scanner is undertaken through software, and it's really just a series of settings that you're making depending on the kind of object that you're digitizing, the kind of quality that you want to digitize it at. And so this is the kind of workstation that would be really great to use if your staff, the staff that you had on hand, was relatively low skilled, at least when it came to photography. Or let's say you're heavily relying on volunteers to do the digitization of your materials. This is the sort of thing that you can just sort of identify the settings that you want to use for your particular collection materials, hand those settings off to your volunteers, just so long as they're checking those settings every 20, 30, 50 shots, scans in this case, to ensure that nothing has changed. This is a really great option to get high quality and very consistent digital images from collection materials. And again, to do so using either relatively unskilled labor, at least relative to photography, or volunteers who have no experience with cultural heritage digitization whatsoever. All right, the third setup that we have on view, if you want to say that, here today is the most complicated, is has the most sort of different variables that you have control over. It also is more than likely the most expensive that you would be investing in if you chose to go this route. And it's also the one that would likely, or almost by necessity, require the sort of highest degree of skill in the staff that is using this equipment. And this is, as is sort of known in the field, a copy stand. And it's not dissimilar from the sort of iPad stand that we looked at earlier. Basically, the sort of premise here is that you have a table. To that table is mounted a column, and to that column is mounted an arm that can move up or down as needed. And on that arm is a mount for a digital camera. In this case, we're in particular using a digital SLR, a digital single lens reflex digital camera, which is sort of medium grade, medium to high quality grade digital camera used by professionals and sort of amateur professionals. Or with this station, you could also use a point and shoot camera if you wanted to, though it might not be worth investing in the ancillary equipment and the copy stand itself. If you're just going to be using a point and shoot camera, you can even take it a step further and invest in very, very high-end photography equipment, which is a medium format digital camera back, medium format camera body, and specially designed medium format lenses. As I sort of suggested, this is the most complex type of imaging workstation that we're seeing today, and with that complexity typically comes a higher cost. With what we're seeing here, this is a pretty stripped down version of what a copy stand would probably look like in an imaging studio or imaging lab if you were to see one. In this case, we're using sort of a lower end digital SLR, a pretty decent quality zoom lens, and then a table mounted arm and column to support the camera, and then two sort of continuous fluorescent light sources. Altogether, this would cost in the range of $1,000 to $1,500. With copy stands, though, it's almost the sky is the limits. If you went with a really high-end digital SLR and a sort of more stable and sort of higher sort of quality copy stand, you could be looking to spend upwards of $10,000. And then if you wanted to really take it, to the next level, let's say, you could be spending $80,000 to $100,000 if you wanted to invest in a medium format digital back, at least a particularly high resolution one, and then all of the attendant high-end lighting sources that would be appropriate for going that route. So I've mentioned the sort of the complexity of this station, and also suggested that with that complexity comes a certain amount of flexibility. And so this station is really great if you have a really diverse sort of set of materials in your collection and you want to be able to try to digitize as much of them as possible with one single set of equipment.